Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Joel Hunter here to discuss with you today a bit about Taoism. What I want to do is step through some of the key vocabulary that's in your text here, the Huston Smith World Religions text, and prepare you for the quiz that will be on Taoism, but then also to give an overview of Taoism as we look through our model. And if you recall, the model for world religions that I have provided to you for this course, we'll use it again for looking at each of the religions we're doing. And today we're going to look at Taoism through that model. And I'm going to point to a few things that will help you answer the three central questions in the model, and then sort of be able to find a comparative basis for looking at Taoism comparatively to other religions, is what I was trying to say. Okay, so let's start just a moment here with Taoism and just a little bit of background, and let me switch over to the actual slides that I've got prepared for you. Let me just recenter that just a bit. Okay, so what we're talking about is religion, primarily in China. And if you look back at what we discussed with Buddhism, you're going to see some similarities with Buddhism, in particular Zen. So there's a section dedicated to Zen in your Huston Smith book. I would encourage you to reread that. And Smith makes the point, and I think this is a helpful way to sort of begin thinking about Taoism, is that Zen is what happens when Buddhism is run through the filter of Taoism. And so there's a real close connection then between a lot of the emphases on certain kinds of meditative practices, as well as the ultimate aims and even some of the metaphysics behind Zen and Taoism. And I'll touch on that where it's appropriate. So by tradition, Taoism originated with Lao Tzu. That's spelled in common spellings Laotzu. You'll also see it as one word, Laozi. And this is a kind of shadowy figure, historically speaking. And by tradition, he was a contemporary of Confucius, and there are interesting reasons for that, partly because Taoism and Confucianism are often seen as very opposed to each other, particularly when it comes to the social sphere and human affairs. But other evidence suggests that he lived later. That is Lao Tzu, and so that would have been if he was a contemporary Confucius, that would have been the 6th century BCE. So the primary text, and the one that Smith is citing and drawing from the most, is the Tao Te Ching. And the Tao Te Ching, we'll talk just a moment about that. I've got some slides just to examine the meaning of those terms in the title of the text. This is an ancient text. The oldest manuscripts date to about the 4th century BCE. And its form is primarily poetic, and it's divided into 81 chapters or sections, and each of those has a single idea that it's trying to get across. So again, it's a pithy text, and it is poetic in form. Now the other primary text is the Zhianse, the Zhianse. Not pronouncing that right, I'm sure. Let me try that again. Zhianse. Spelling is Zhuangzi. And this text is considered to be a later text, more than likely, spanning the period 476 to 221 BCE. Now, its form is different than the Tao Te Ching. Its form is through a collection of allegories and stories and anecdotes, parables and fables, material like that. But these are the two primary texts, religious texts of Taoism. And let's go ahead and turn then to your readings. And again, I'm in Smith, pages 196 to 219. The Novak is drawing selections from both of these texts, as well as some additional sayings, the grace notes. And let's go ahead right away into our vocabulary. These are the terms I need you to know for the quiz. And we can start right away with the title. So Tao is the way. That is the typical pithy definition of it. It's not very helpful, though, if we don't know what way we're talking about, or path. And so we're going to talk about the three meanings of the Tao in just a moment. But I'll go ahead and mention them now. Okay, overall, what the Tao refers to is the, I think what Wikipedia calls it, the essential unnameable process of the universe. I don't think that's very helpful. Really, by analogy, I think one of the more helpful ways to think of the Tao is a law of nature, and that should be broadly construed, not just the laws of physical nature, the laws of biological nature, but also the laws of moral nature. And that connects it to the second word in the title, de, which is there. But let's come back to the Tao for a second. If you think of Tao as this sort of, not just a law as something descriptive about how the universe works, but the actual functioning of the universe, the actual workings of the universe, that it's something dynamic, and as insofar as its laws, it can be discovered, but it's also something that is ongoing, and that is working itself out in everything that happens, every change. Every change is part of the Tao and its process of becoming. Okay, well, that's all very abstract and sort of mystical, but let me see if I can go ahead and tie you down to the Smith text and talk about the three meanings of the Tao. So the first meaning of Tao is broadest, or ultimate sense, I should say, not broadest, but ultimate sense, is its transcendent sense. And that is, the Tao is the way of ultimate reality. So it is ineffable. It can't really be described. It can't be defined. It is something undefinable. But it is that ground of all that is and all that derives from it. And your author makes an allusion to can't think of his name, Neoplatonic philosopher Plotinus, and his description of the one. And that's a pretty good analogy. But that is, and there's been a lot of scholarship done on the connections between Neoplatonic philosophy and the Eastern traditions, especially religious traditions. Okay, so that's the first sense, this sort of divine sense, this ultimate or transcendent sense. So the Tao is then, in the second sense, the way of the universe. So this is how the Tao is present all the time to us. So the word there is immanent. So on the one hand, the Tao is transcendent, beyond experience, beyond definition, beyond the grasp of language and even the discursive intellect. But at the same time, it is always present with us. It is always around us and in us. And so it is something that can be not just pointed to or indicated indirectly, but directly described and seen. But we always have to qualify that as that's never its fullest or comprehensive sense. All right, let me back up. So we're talking about then the way of the universe. So it's the rhythms, it's the central ordering principle of all nature and all life. It is inexhaustible, and it is being the sort of inner principle of being, of all that is, of nature, of the universe. It is spirit rather than matter. But don't confuse spirit with something like ghostly matter. Okay, don't think of spirit as sort of this antimatter or something like that. It is more akin to something like breath. And so the Tao is the breath of all that is, of the universe, of all that's visible and invisible. And Taoism uses analogies, natural analogies like breath, or like especially water, which we will get to shortly. Okay, so it is, and here's some quotes from Taoist texts that describe this aspect of the Tao, the second meaning. It's that fountain ever on. And so that's an important element too, and that gets back to what I was saying earlier about this dynamic feature of the Tao, and that is it's a creative process and force, and so it's always producing, and that's important too. It emanates life and energy. It is also described as the mother of the world, and so the Tao then is life-giving as well. So there's an ordering part to it, and then there's this creative element as well. And it is also described as then, and I mentioned this earlier, and this is where the first sense and the second sense come together, really, and that is this. It's the eternal law that structures the world. So there's that sense of law again. Very important. All right, so the third sense then is the part that hits nearest home. So Tao is the way of human life. And this is where it really does connect with the moral life and how we ought to live. But insofar as the Tao is the way of human life, that is something that is then meshed with the second sense of the Tao, in that it is also the way of the universe. So you can see these three meanings. The second meaning and third meaning in particular is the Tao is something that draws us in and connects us and makes us one with the world, the universe, the natural world too. Okay, and that's going to be key for then some of the spiritual practices as well as some of the aims and what we are seeking in Taoism. Okay, so that's the Tao. De. De is rendered usually by your author as power. And power is fine, but it doesn't really say all that can be said or should be said about De. So De is not just power, but an inner power, an inner potency to act in accord with the Tao. So it is a divine power in that sense, and that directs us or draws us to moral excellence, to goodness. And so it is, De is then virtue. It is one's character that is in tune with, aligned with the Tao. And so it speaks to an inner strength. So not power, if you think of power as, exercising power over others, or some sort of, mastery with the right hand, right? That's not at all what De means. And in fact, De is, or Taoism, I should say, is, will attempt to undermine a way of life that seeks to control itself and others through that kind of power, that kind of exercise of external power and mastery over others. This has more to do with integrity and inner strength, and the way of life for characterized by De is best captured by, I think, the adjective virtuosity. Think of a virtuoso. A virtuoso is almost always applied to someone who is musical and who is sort of at the top of their abilities and the abilities of all musicians. A virtuoso is someone who performs music seemingly without effort. It comes natural to the virtuoso. And that is exactly what we're talking about in Taoism. Taoism is a way of life that seems effortless if you looked at it from the outside. And even from the inside, although there's training and practice required to become the virtuoso, it is marked by a constant state of tranquility, of effortlessness. So it's a different kind of strength in that sense than the kind of strength, where we just got to bear down and do it. We got to buckle down and that kind of thing. No, it isn't the exertion of the will. It is instead the learning of a craft of living that is both challenging but easy. And, this is where language does fall apart when you talk about Taoism, is that you have to bring these opposites together. We'll get to that in just a bit. But anyway, I want to just emphasize that connection. If you think of the word virtue, the virtue of something is its excellence, what makes it excellent. Plato gave the famous example, the virtue of, is this Plato or is Aristotle? The virtue of the knife is sharpness. What makes a knife virtuous is its sharpness. And so what makes a human virtuous is moral excellence then. And in particular, the way that is exercised is as a virtuoso. So that's what we're after in Taoism, is moral virtuosity, ethical virtuosity. And you could say, since this is primarily about a moral life, you could say this is a religious virtuosity as well. Okay. And then the third name in the primary text, Tao Te Ching, is Jing, and it simply means a book, a great book in particular. And you think of it as the canonical book. Canon means rule, and so we're talking then about a book that is recognized as embodying the key message or principles that express the religion. So that's Jing. Okay. Now, in the Tao Te Ching, you have it divided. I remember I mentioned that it has 81 chapters or sections. So in chapters 1 through 37 of the Tao, you have what's called the Tao Ching. So that's the Tao book. So the book of the Tao. So that's talking about the way. And then you have chapters 38 through 81, which is the Te Ching. And so that's then is talking about power and the book of power, or the book of, as I mentioned, virtue or virtuosity. And so that you will find the selections in your Novak text will help you identify, okay, is this part of the Tao Ching or is this part of the Te Ching? Okay? All right, key term now when we get into our actual teachings is Wu Wei. So Wu Wei is literally means inaction. But in Taoism, it means pure effectiveness. So it is about the removal of friction and conflict as far as possible. So getting friction and conflict down to a minimum. And that makes then action effortless and efficient. And so Wu Wei means pure effectiveness in that sense. Now, what kinds of friction and conflict? Well, there are three main types. There is the inner kind of conflict, psychological states at war with one another in oneself. Then there is, of course, interpersonal relationships and conflict there. And then there is conflict with the external world of nature. And Wu Wei addresses all of those. So it certainly has to do with the getting the conflict within oneself to a minimum, getting conflict with others down to a minimum, getting conflict with one's external world to a minimum. Okay, so that's Wu Wei. And let me see if I had anything else I wanted to say about that at this point. I'll probably say some more about that, but that's the basic concept. So make sure that you know that term. Then the term Qi is important, in particular the vitalizing schools of Taoism, and I'll mention that in just a moment, the different schools. But Qi means literally breath, but what it means in Taoism, it's vital energy. It means life, and in particular, it is a progression of life that is that can be developed and expanded, increased, augmented. So the idea of Qi is what it is that makes one alive. So it's good to be alive. It's better to be more alive, more aware, more conscious. And it's even best to be always alive. And it is Qi that enables that. And then we'll talk about then the three things that maximize Qi that are discussed in your text. Okay, number one is matter. So things like nutrition programs, breathing exercises, various kinds of herbs and stuff to help one's diet and health. All of those are important, and and there's been within Taoism a search for an elixir of life that would provide immortality. So that's all at the material component to maximize Qi. The second component to maximize Qi is movement. And so this is where, especially in the West, insofar as the West has imported some of the practices, there's Tai Chi, of course, Tai Chi Chuan. And that is drawing Qi from the cosmos and removes blocks to the flow of Qi through a synthesis of various kinds of movement. So that includes things like dance, meditation, and particular meditation on the Yin-Yang relationship, martial arts, calisthenics. All of those are integrated into this practice of Tai Chi, into a synthesis. Okay, and the point again is you want to maximize Qi because that increases life. It makes one more alive, increases one's power, one's day. Okay. And the third, and this is already, you can see how the three are really connected, is we can maximize Qi, one's mind, and this is done through meditation. And your author gives a really helpful suggestion to go over and reread in Hinduism about Raja Yoga. It is quite similar, and the yogis, Taoist yogis, seek to harness the Tao and transmit it psychically to the community. So this is done through meditative practices. Okay, so let me see if I wanted to say anything else about Qi at this point. Okay, so the connection, just to make sure you understand the connection here, is that the Qi is connected then to De, to power, or virtuosity. And Qi is life. Life is the vital energy that can increase one's day. Okay, and then lastly is the Yin-Yang. And of course there's the famous symbol of Yin and Yang. And so this expresses then the opposites, the relativity of values and concepts, like good and evil, things that are considered complementary, like male and female. And the idea here is, if you see the colors, there's a bit of the opposite color in each one. So the white yang has a little bit of black yin in it, and black yin has a little bit of white yang in it. And that's the idea, is that what is happening in the working out of the Tao is that these concepts, these values are in flux, and they're turning into one another, sort of exchanging places even at times and through history. So one of the key points on meditating on the symbol is to notice not only obviously the oppositions that are present, but their identity with one another, and that where it's clear how they are in tension, they're also complementary. And that by virtue of the shapes of the symbol, it expresses a balance in them. They occupy the same area. And moreover, the two make up a whole, and that is important as well. So if you think of the symbol not as this sort of static representation, but as in motion, that will give you some sense of what the role of meditating on the yin-yang is for. So if you look at the white area as shrinking and the black is expanding, the black circle in the white area is expanding, you can see it taking, occupying the same space and then exchanging space with the other side. So look at this as dynamic as well, and you can appreciate then the focus is on ultimately the whole, the Tao. Okay, so let me touch now on a few things about the three meanings of the Tao. I've actually already done this. Okay, so I'm not going to go through those again. I've already touched on those, but here they are on a single slide for you. Three approaches to power today, and I haven't touched on this yet, but or I've touched on one of them, but I'll mention all three now. And so this is how Smith divides his discussion. He starts with the philosophical and introduces it, but then he comes back to it in the second half of the chapter and expands on the philosophical meaning or approach to de, and it doesn't give as much attention to the religious. So actually the religious is the approach that is not discussed nearly as much as the other two. Okay, so there's philosophical Taoism, there is religious Taoism, and there's vitalizing Taoism. So vitalizing, how to put it, call it practical, I guess, maybe, would be the way to think of it. But practical that aims to increase life. Now, I think it's toward the end of the chapter, Smith makes an important point, and that is these aren't three schools, technically speaking, because all three of them, whichever approach the individual Taoist may enter into Taoism, it ends up being that all three are somehow meshed together in the experience, and that these are not. So I guess what I'm getting at is they're not sects that are necessarily opposed to one another. Say, oh, it's not like the philosophical Taoists are going, oh, you religious Taoists got it all wrong. This is the way to do it. It's not like that. Okay, it's like each is an expression of the same thing. It's their aims are slightly different, and that's what we need to get to. And that's why actually he calls them approaches to de, because that's really where the difference lies. Okay. So let's talk then about, let me see if I have it. Do I have it broken up? Yeah, good. Okay, so let's look at the key doctrines of philosophical Taoism. Okay, so the key word there, and I probably should have highlighted this on the slide, is conserve. So this is why efficiency is so important. Conserve one's de by using it efficiently. So think back again to moral excellence and virtuosity. Of doing right action without effort. That's the aim. And so one conserves one's day if one achieves that state of being the moral virtuoso. Okay? So, what do we need to do in philosophical Taoism to do that? Well, we have to repair life. We find that we spend our vitality, we waste our vitality on useless and draining activities. And so what we have to learn to do is to live more wisely so that we are not using our vital energy in things that are ultimately wasteful. Okay, so right there is sort of a hint about what philosophical Taoism might emphasize about the human condition or the human predicament, and we'll draw that out in just a moment. And then the emphasis, the concept that is extremely important in philosophical Taoism is Wu Wei, and I've already mentioned that and defined that for you. So you can see how if we're going to then behave more efficiently, and that means in a moral sense, okay, to become the moral virtuoso, we have to reduce our friction and conflict, both internally and externally, to a minimum. Okay, so vitalizing Taoism, and this is where the concept of Qi will become important. Here the key word is increase. Okay, so we're not just conserving day, we are trying to increase day, one's allotment of day, by practices that maximize Qi. Okay, and remember, Qi is this vital energy, this life. So we're trying to become more alive, and if possible, always alive. Immortality. So there are three things, I mentioned these already, that maximize Qi, the matter movement in one's mind. And what is the sort of religious component to this is, or even moral component, I should say, is the importance of reversing sort of ego-driven action. So, not ego-driven, egocentric action. Okay, so anything that's self-seeking is going to result in a loss of Qi, and therefore you're not going to be able to increase your power to live well, to live wisely. So we got to reverse that, and instead we need to cultivate cleanliness of thought and body. It's interesting, I think, that as with so many religions that we have looked at and we're going to look at, the connection between the inner life and the outer body. There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, in the West that somehow the body is unimportant, either in the monotheistic traditions of the West or in the Eastern traditions. And you find instead, I think, a stronger emphasis on their integration, on their mutual importance and significance. All right, so to do this, to reverse our self-seeking, our egocentric action, and to cultivate cleanliness, especially of thought, then we're going to be needing to get rid of or suppress or quell these perturbing emotions. And here's where your yin-yang can come in handy. Notice the pairs here of desire and revulsion. So desire is like strong attraction, revulsion is strong, rejection. Grief and joy, opposites again. And what's important about these then is the way they are, the way they unsettle one's mind and one's inner life. And so, and they are about one's own, maximizing one's own importance or one's own experience at the expense of the Tao. And so they do perturb, according to Taoism, and so they need to be quelled. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else I want to say about that. Yeah, so if we do that, how we do that is we got to see the importance of peace and stillness. Those are the things that are good for the mind. That's why we're quelling those things that perturb the mind. And so how we do it is through deep meditation. I love the way Smith describes this as an alert waiting. So it's not simply an emptying and a non-awareness. It is instead an alertness that is cultivated, but waiting for the Tao to move. Remember, it's dynamic. It's in motion. And one can be drawn into the Tao. One can align oneself with the Tao in this state of alert waiting. Okay, so then with that, then becomes this awareness of oneself at a new level, from a new height. What in the religious sense would be a kind of super consciousness, a divine perspective, if you will. So with that realization of this pure self, unsullied by worry and distraction, comes then these kinds of experiences of truth, especially of oneself, but also of the whole, of joy and of power. Okay, so back to day again. So everything is from attaining this realization of the pure self, everything falls into place, as it were. You become serene and immovable. I think Smith calls this like the monarch on the throne. There is no need in this state to grapple with one's will and to exercise it, through some sort of moral exertion. One has removed barriers to action that is in harmony with the Tao. Okay, lastly is religious Taoism, what some would call church Taoism. Is, according to Smith, this took shape later in the Taoist tradition, 2nd century AD. And the key term that Smith chooses to use here is magic. Of course, this is potentially confusing since we think of magic here in the West in particular as, sleight of hand, this sort of use of illusion to entertain. But that's not at all what magic. What Smith means by magic here is the ancient sense of magic as an occult power, a higher power, a divine power that can be tapped into for use in the ordinary world. And it's not just, again, would not be ego-serving, although clearly there would be material benefits for the shamans and priests who are able to do this for one. But it is for the benefit of others. It's to help the needs of people. And so the way this chain would go, if we look at the sort of progression of realities, is that if you look at the slide, you have this dashed line under dense and subtle. Okay, so that's the material. You have subtle matter, and think here. Okay, if you remember some of your basic physics, like how the atom is mostly empty space. It consists of the nucleus, the protons and neutrons, but then it has this sort of cloud of electrons around it. But it's mostly empty space. So you think of matter at that atomic scale as being subtle. In other words, the stuffishness of it is not very much at all. Whereas ordinary matter, the table, the computer, etc., or our bodies, are dense. We're stuffy. We're stuffish. Okay, so the subtle is superior to the dense. Energy is superior to matter, to both forms of matter. Consciousness is superior to energy. And by the way, energy, think vital energy there, right? Life energy. Then consciousness is superior then to energy. And by superior, I mean significant, is more significant, more important. And then superconsciousness, a sort of divine consciousness, is superior to human consciousness. Okay. Or natural consciousness, if you want to think of it that way. Okay. So that's really all to be said about religious Taoism that we're going to talk about in the text. Now, we're going to talk about religious Taoism, but we're going to look at the whole phenomenon of Taoism through the model. And we'll try to say something where you can pull from each of the three types of Taoism, to answer questions in the model. Okay, so what's common to all three types? So the aim is to maximize the Tao's animating de, power, vital energy, to become the virtuoso. So in the philosophical Taoism is how to best use your normal allotment of qi, or de, sorry, probably should say de there. Vitalizing is how to increase one's normal allotment of de by maximizing qi. And then in religious, it is how to harness cosmic energy to help people in need. That is how we maximize the Tao, the working of the Tao in our own lives, the lives of our community. Okay, so let me think if I had anything more. I guess I did put in this extra material here. And this follows Smith's progression, by the way, where he talks about the three different types of Taoism, but then comes back to philosophical Taoism to make a few more points. So the idea, again, in philosophical Taoism is to perfect this life of Wu Wei. And he calls it creative quietude. Remember what I said earlier about that state of deep meditation being one of alert, alert waiting. Okay, so creative quietude. And here again, think virtuoso, the embodiment of suppleness, flexibility, simplicity, and freedom. If you think about the virtuosic musician, that's exactly what characterizes their effort. It is supple. It seems to be without effort. It's simple. The movement seems simple and quick. And then freedom. It seems like they could do anything with their musical ability. Okay, an important principle in philosophical Taoism is this law of reversed effort, and there is primary text to support that and talk about that. But we all kind of know this. Like if you think of trying to make friends, the harder you try to do some things, like make friends, a lot of times the more it backfires. So what Taoism does is take this and sort of extrapolate this common experience that we have and make it a general principle, a general law, is that the harder we try in particular to either conserve or augment our day, the harder we try at that, the less effective our efforts are going to be. And so Taoism encourages us to remember that. This is not about buckling down and exerting the will. That is not how to become a better Taoist. Okay, so what we should see then, or what we aim for, is this attunement with the Tao. And if we are in tune with the Tao, then we find that our behavior flows naturally and spontaneously. And in particular, this morally excellent behavior. And the common image in Taoism is water that expresses this. Let's see. So you think of how water, and there's the discussion of how water is, it's not heavy, it's not dense, but yet over time it wears down dense things. It wears down rocks, very, very hard rocks, and smooths them out. When you think of what the Tao is doing, that is what is happening as one practices Taoism. One's own inner rocks, the rocky, jagged places, are getting worn smooth. And so the other feature of water that is, there are several features of water that are important, but one is that it adapts to its surroundings. And there's a nice little discussion about architecture and how Taoist temples, for example, they're not going to stand out from their surroundings. They're not going to be like cathedrals. They're going to look natural. They're going to look like part of the environment, and that is also like what water does. Water adapts to its surroundings, even as it changes them. Then water also, when it's still, and think of that, in the meditative state of alert waiting, water is clearer. So one begins to see oneself more accurately, as well as one's relations with others, one's relations with nature. So water clarifies, it is clear, and so is the Tao when it is allowed to be still. So the other important quote that I want to point out to you is from the Tao Te Ching. It is number 8, in chapter 8. The supreme good is like water. So remember, one of your key principles, central principles in the model is, well, what is the supreme good? What is the highest good for humans? And it's the Tao, but in particular, it's described as like water. The supreme good is like water. And giving you some of the reasons that it is considered that in Taoism. Okay, so let's move then to some other Taoist values, and then we'll quickly touch on the model. So humility is very important in Taoism. So Taoism rejects all forms of self-assertiveness and competition. You think about, what makes a good cup? A good cup is this container, but it's the empty space in the cup. If it's integrated, if it is whole, right? If it's not broken, it has this space, and that's where the virtue of the cup is. Think of a doorway. The virtue of the doorway is its space, is what's not there. The virtue of the window is what's not there. Okay, so the value then the value then of the ego or oneself is what is precisely not there. And so humility is what is an important value in Taoism. The second important value is disinterest in the things that the world values most. Now, you can ask yourself, what does the world value most? Well, you think about that. And this is not a difficult list to come up with, right? Fame, power over others, not power, but the conventional sense of power. I think political power in particular, ruling over others. Then what else does the world value? Wealth. And you could add to that list. So Taoism, simply has, it doesn't necessarily call those things bad, but it just is uninterested in them. It does not value them. It values other things. Other value is its attunement with nature. And you think about stories, you think about the Western novel in particular, you think about, Moby Dick, and other famous works of Western literature, and many of them will feature characters or antagonists protagonists whose major antagonist is nature itself, or some other non-human entity, in this case a whale, right? There's the human conflict within the human being itself. So man versus man. There's the man with himself, and then there's the human conflict with others. So human versus another human, human versus society, and then there's the human versus nature. And this is just alien to Taoism, the idea that there is intrinsic or expected conflict with nature. So Taoism has an ecological perspective rather than a perspective of mastery or domination whether with the intellect or with technology, toward nature. And lastly is the relativity of values and concepts. And I've already mentioned this with the concept, with the symbol of the Yin-Yang. And again, to think of that as dynamic. Okay, so really quickly now I want to touch on elements to include in your model. And how does Taoism describe the human predicament? And, the human predicament is difficult to characterize in Taoism. This is probably one of the harder ones to do, since the underlying reality, the Tao, is the central principle of the universe, and its ways cannot be hindered. You can't stop the Tao. You can only stop yourself from being in tune with or one with the Tao. And there's a quote in Novak's page 148, selection from primary text. The Tao is great. The universe is great. Earth is great. Man is great. These are the four great powers. So Taoism affirms that humans are at home in this universe. Humanity in body and spirit, like the physical and underlying metaphysical universe, are all creative emanations of the Tao. I mentioned this earlier. And in this respect, maybe this is surprising to some, but in this respect, it's a lot like Judaism and Christianity, which recognize the underlying reality, God, and the products of God's creative will and power, including humans, as fundamentally good. And the question then is, so what is broken then? What is askew in humans that makes us feel ill at ease and not at home? Well, we have to go to the De. The power of the Tao sustains all life. De sustains Tao. The De of the Tao sustains all life. And so the human predicament in Taoism is a result of our being lost, of wasting our De on useless activity, on emotion and thought that divert us from the Tao, from the way. So we stray from the way. And as Buddha said, we're out of joint. Life is unsatisfactory because our share of the De, of the way, is squandered in activity that opposes the way. And so the three main schools that we talked about, I should say schools, but the three types of Taoism that we talked about, each have their own way of overcoming that predicament, this predicament. So that is described here as, the aggressiveness that we see and experience, any aggression that we feel, ego-laden desire, I want this, or, the pursuit of that through self-assertion and through competition. Any kind of friction or conflict, whether that's internal or external. And then, as I mentioned, any activities or attitudes that squander De. These all constitute the human predicament then. So what is salvation then? What is the cure to this? How do we become liberated from this captivity insofar as it captivates us? Well, one way to look at, again, predicament is that it is a lack, it's an absence, it's a negation of something described, that would be normal for us. So the De, normally, when it is allowed to, when it's unrestricted, flows like water. So the Tao Te Ching often contrasts, and you can make sure you look at these passages in the Novak text, contrasts the master or superior man with the foolish man. So if you look at the characteristics of the foolish man, or even the average man sometimes it's called, you'll get an insight into what Taoism says about the generic wretchedness that seems to be present everywhere in the human world. And the exceptions then are the superior men. So what does the foolish man do when he hears about the Tao? He laughs out loud. Right? It sounds foolish. So the key characteristic of the Tao is the harmony with the Tao. And so the admonition, if you would not be told that you ought to live in harmony with the Tao, unless by implication many do not. So what prevents us from living in harmony with the Tao? Again, I'm sorry, I probably jumped ahead. This aggressiveness or ego-laden desire is what impedes or makes us out of joint, out of harmony with the Tao. Several passages in the text will, in the Novak text in particular, will give you a flavor for this, and I'll just mention a couple of them. Let's see. Let me give you an example of this one about the master. Okay, so the master acts without doing anything and teaches without saying anything. Things arise and she lets them come. Things disappear and she lets them go. She has but doesn't possess, acts but doesn't expect. When her work is done, she forgets it. So this is in Novak, pages 152 to 153. Here's another, also on page 153. Chase after money and security, and your heart will never unclench. Care about people's approval, and you will be their prisoner. So there you have, cast as a negative light, the human predicament. The things, the values of the world, money, security, people's approval. Let's see. Rushing into action, you fail. Trying to grasp things, you lose them. Forcing a project to completion, you ruin what was almost ripe. Notice the use of ripeness there, a natural process, to contrast with the sort of constructive project that humans undertake in building. So that's on page 25. Oh, let's see here. I have a couple more quotes for you. Oh yeah, I like this one. So this is on page 156. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death. The hard and stiff will be broken. The Tao. The soft and supple will prevail. Notice the values there implicit in that, and how it's topsy-turvy from what we would tend to say, well, what's lasting and durable, it's going to make it. Well, in Taoism, it's the soft and supple, not the hard and the stiff. Okay, so we have what do I want to say? The harmony, but also balance is important as well. Complementary of forces. So this is where the Yin and Yang come into play as a useful symbol. In page 163 of Novak, he quotes, "If you want to get rid of something, you must first allow it to flourish. If you want to take something, you must first allow it to be given." So if you strive against the Tao, then this ego-laden, this ego-centric action, striving against the Tao, what is going to be opposed to that? What is the solution to it? A quiet mind, contentment, simplicity, patience, compassion. If those qualities are absent from one's life, the more the life will be squandered in futile efforts to satisfy the ego, and the more one will be imprisoned by its demands. Okay, so let's talk then about overcoming that predicament. How does it describe salvation then? Really, it's contained in the title of the text, the Tao De Jing. De can be translated as power, as we mentioned, it's virtuosity, moral virtuosity. And Wu Wei, then, is the key concept here, especially in philosophical Taoism, for creative letting be of not doing, which is refraining from wasting one's time, energy, and thought on useless activity, emotion, and thought that divert you from the way. So perfecting a life of Wu Wei is the path of salvation in Taoism. So salvation then consists in deploying De to be aligned with the Tao. So you have harmony, you achieve harmony and balance, a quiet mind. One acts out from instinct spontaneously, and one attains self-knowledge and truth. In vitalizing Taoism, it is maximizing Qi and harnessing the Tao through specific mental, spiritual practices. And it's a yogic kind of Taoism where you work out your salvation through these kinds of practices. And then in the religious type of Taoism, it is tapping directly into the divine power of the Tao through ritualistic practices and through mediators who are priests or shamans, and again, who act in such a way as to distribute De through the community to help people in need. And then lastly, we have the supreme good for humans, and I've already mentioned it's like water. And we've already touched on this, but it would be harmony or union with the Tao. Let's see. Remember, in Taoism, it's about becoming fully human, becoming what we already are, and that is, going to be removing the things that prevent us from being who we really are. So, if we look at the Tao again in that transcendent sense, we have it as it is a way, it's a path, it's the working out of the law of the universe, it's reality. And the mind cannot grasp it. Its eternal existence is the ground of all that exists. It's ineffable, can't be spoken of, captured, I should say, with language. So in Novak, page 147, he quotes, "The Tao is called the Great Mother, empty yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want." It's clear then that the Tao itself, especially in its immanent sense, is the supreme good, at least part of the supreme good. So where we, let's see, so our aim then is to be integrated, our life to be integrated with the way of the universe, so that our lives, just as the Tao is an ordering principle of reality, so our lives become ordered, but through instinct and through spontaneity, through action that does not require force or will. But it is described better as inaction. Okay, so the supreme good I mentioned earlier is like water, which nourishes all things without trying to. This is quoted in Novak, page 160. So mastery of the way is possible in this life. The supreme good is the condition of Wu Wei. So Wu Wei is described in philosophical Taoism as salvation, but it's not only it is not only the means of our salvation, it is also what salvation is too. So the pure effectiveness and creative quietude of Wu Wei combine within a single individual two seemingly incompatible conditions: supreme activity and supreme relaxation. Attaining Wu Wei is transformative. It is the height, or rather the still center from which we have strayed, and to which we can return to all that human life has the potential to be. Once attained, the task while remaining in this mortal life is to continually focus your energy on eternal wholeness through the guidance of the way, the Tao, the self-discipline of the power, De, and the self-discipline required to attain Wu Wei and wholeness. an individual can reach liberation. Okay, and that concludes then our discussion of Taoism. Sorry this was just over an hour. I didn't realize it would take that long to go through it, but I hope this was helpful. And I look forward to reading what you produce on your model. Now, for those of you taking my course, you will be completing a model response, and you have a choice to choose either Confucianism or Taoism. And so both of these will be challenging. That's why, and because they're complementary to one another, is the reason I wanted to give you a choice between the two. But both are challenging, and hopefully if you choose to do your model on Taoism, you'll have found this video helpful. All right, well, until next time, I'll see you later. Again, Dr. Joel Hunter, and be talking with you soon.